The flashing red and blue lights bounced off the windows of my house like a carnival gone wrong. I stood on my porch barefoot, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, watching two police officers scratch their heads in confusion. Across the street, there she was, Karen. Hair in perfect curls, arms crossed like a judge at a trial, yelling something about privacy invasion and unauthorized surveillance. But the funny part? The reason the cops were even here was because I had put up motion sensor security lights. And the kicker, the part that made one of the officers actually laugh under his breath, was that Karen's house, the very one she was screaming from, was sitting smack dab inside my security light zone. Yeah, she called the cops on me for lights that were lighting up her own front yard because she lived within the range of my property's security setup. The look on her face when she realized that? Priceless. But that wasn't how all this started. No, it began months earlier, back when I thought joining an HOA neighborhood would mean safety, community, and friendly neighbors. Turns out, I was wrong on all counts, and it all began the day I tried to make my home just a little bit safer. Let's rewind. When I first moved into Maplewood Estates, I was genuinely happy. The lawns looked like something straight out of a magazine. Everyone waved when you drove by. Kids played in the cul-de-sac till sunset. It was perfect, or at least it seemed that way. After years of renting in noisy city apartments, I wanted peace. I wanted to finally sleep without the sound of sirens or shouting. I bought a cozy 2-story home on a corner lot, with a big oak tree shading the driveway. It was everything I dreamed of. But I didn't know yet that behind those picture-perfect lawns and freshly painted fences lurked something far darker than city noise: HOA politics. The first person to greet me wasn't the friendly mailman or a welcoming neighbor, it was Karen. She introduced herself as the Community Compliance Liaison. I didn't know what that meant, but it sounded like something made up to feel important. She had this smile that didn't reach her eyes, like the kind you wear when you're trying not to say what you're really thinking. "Welcome to Maplewood," she chirped, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. "We pride ourselves on maintaining a certain standard here. If you have any questions about the rules, I'm your go-to." I thanked her politely. She looked over my shoulder at the moving truck, her eyes narrowing at the sight of a small pile of lumber. "What's that for?" she asked. "Oh, I'm just planning to build a small tool shed in the back," I said. Her smile vanished. "Ah. Well, you'll need to submit a form for that to the HOA Architectural Committee. We can't have unsightly structures ruining the neighborhood aesthetics." I nodded, trying to stay friendly. "Got it. I'll read the guidelines." But inside, I was already getting that strange gut feeling that she'd be a problem. For the first few weeks, things went smoothly. I kept my grass trimmed, put out my trash bins on time, waved to the neighbors. I even brought cookies to the family next door. But Karen, she was everywhere. I'd see her walking by with her phone camera out, taking photos of people's lawns, mailboxes, even cars. Once, I saw her arguing with a teenager for parking too close to the curb. She was like a one-woman police department, enforcing the HOA code with the zeal of a detective on a mission. And I stayed out of her way. Until the break-ins started. It began with little things: packages going missing, car doors being opened at night, a few houses down, someone's garden hose was stolen. Then one night, my neighbor Lisa woke up to see a shadowy figure creeping around her backyard. The next morning, the HOA sent out a reminder email about keeping doors locked. Karen even added a note at the end. "No need for panic. Our community is safe and secure under HOA supervision. There's no reason to install unsightly gadgets or floodlights." That line stuck with me. No need to install floodlights. As if the idea of someone wanting to protect their home was an eyesore. That night, as I was taking out the trash, I saw motion in the corner of my eye. Someone was standing near my truck. I shouted, and the figure bolted into the shadows. My heart pounded as I chased them a few steps before realizing it was useless. They were gone. That was it. I decided to install motion sensor lights around my property. The next morning, I started setting up the lights, simple LED motion sensors that covered my driveway, backyard, and the strip of grass that bordered the sidewalk. Nothing fancy, just basic safety. I was halfway through when I heard that familiar voice behind me. "Excuse me, what exactly are you doing?" "Karen?" "Of course." I turned, trying to stay calm. "Hey, Karen, I'm putting up some motion lights. Someone tried to break into my truck last night." Her face twisted. "Oh, you can't do that without HOA approval. It violates Section 7, Clause 3, Exterior Modifications, and Aesthetic Uniformity." I blinked. "Aesthetic, what now?" She crossed her arms. Those lights will ruin the visual harmony of our community. Besides, we don't have crime here. Tell that to whoever was outside my house last night, I said. Karen pursed her lips like she was sucking on a lemon. If you continue this installation, I'll have no choice but to report you to the HOA board. I almost laughed. Karen, these lights are for security. They're not even visible during the day. I'll make sure they're pointed only at my property. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. You'll regret this. Then she stormed off. That night, the lights went up. I tested each one carefully. Driveway, backyard, side lawn. They worked perfectly. If a cat ran by, they flicked on briefly, then shut off. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. But peace never lasts long in Maplewood Estates. 3 days later, I woke up to the sound of loud knocking. Not the polite kind, angry knocking. I opened the door to find 2 police officers standing on my porch. Behind them, in her signature pastel cardigan, was Karen, hands on her hips, glaring at me like she'd just caught a criminal. Sir, one of the officers said, we received a complaint about surveillance equipment being installed without consent and invading private property. I almost choked. What? Surveillance? These are just motion lights. Karen piped in, pointing dramatically. He has devices that point directly into my home. Every time I walk outside, they flash on. He's recording us. The officer frowned. Sir, do you have any cameras attached to these lights? No, I said, shaking my head. They're just lights. I can show you. We walked to the side of my yard. The officers looked at the fixtures, checking them over. No cameras, no fancy wiring, just basic security lights. Karen stood there, tapping her foot impatiently. Then one of the officers checked the range of the sensors and realized something. He turned to Karen. Ma'am, these lights only cover the homeowner's property line and about 10 feet beyond for safety. Based on this layout, he pointed across the street. Your house falls within that range. Karen froze. What? The officer shrugged. It's his property's natural security zone. Looks like your house happens to sit inside it. Her mouth fell open. That's when I finally smiled. The cops left without filing any report, but the neighborhood buzzed that night like never before. People whispered, rumors spread, and Karen's perfect smile started to crack. She thought she had control over everything, but she never realized her house, her perfectly manicured, rule-following house, was now part of my security zone. And trust me, that was only the beginning. Where are you watching from? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of murmuring voices outside my window. When I pulled the curtains back, I saw 3 of my neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, talking to Karen. She was pointing toward my house again, waving a stack of papers like a lawyer in court. One of the neighbors, a kind older man named Mr. Hopkins, looked uncomfortable. The other 2 nodded along, whispering and glancing at me as if I had committed some sort of neighborhood sin. I sighed. So, it was already spreading. I stepped out onto the porch, pretending to stretch. Morning, I called out cheerfully. Karen stopped mid-sentence. The look she gave me could have curdled milk. Oh, good morning, she said in that sharp tone of hers. We were just discussing community safety concerns. I leaned on the porch railing. Perfect. That's exactly what I was thinking when I put those motion lights up. She gave a tight smile. Yes, but some of us feel they're a bit excessive. They go off at all hours. Even my cat can't go outside without being blinded. Mr. Hopkins tried to calm the situation. Now, Karen, I think it's good he's trying to keep everyone safe. My porch light doesn't catch half the movement his does. I feel better knowing there's more visibility at night. Karen's eyes flicked toward him like she couldn't believe he'd dared to disagree. Visibility isn't the issue, Roger, she snapped. It's the principle. He's modified his property without board consent, and now, we're all dealing with the consequences. I could tell she wasn't going to stop. That clipboard in her hand, that was her sword. And the papers she carried, those were her battle plans. Karen, I said calmly, you know you could have just talked to me about this instead of calling the cops. We could have sorted this out like adults. Her expression hardened. I did talk to you. You ignored the HOA guidelines. I chuckled softly. Right, the ones about lawn flamingos and paint colors? She flushed bright red. Those rules are what keep Maplewood beautiful. If everyone just did whatever they wanted, this place would look like chaos. I shrugged. Or maybe it would look like people having freedom. That line hit harder than I expected. Mr. Hopkins smiled faintly, but Karen spun on her heel, muttering something about a board meeting. I knew she wasn't done. That night, I noticed something strange. Every time my lights flicked on, they stayed on a little longer than before. I walked outside, checking the sensors. Everything seemed normal. But then I caught movement at the corner of my eye, a flashlight beam darting across my driveway. I froze. Someone was crouched near the motion light pole, fiddling with something. I stepped out, voice firm. "Hey, what are you doing?" The person jolted up like a startled raccoon. The beam from my light landed on her face. It was Karen. "Are you serious right now?" I said, stepping closer. She straightened, brushing dirt off her knees. "I was just checking something. HOA business. On my property? At midnight?" She crossed her arms, trying to look dignified. "You're disturbing the peace with these lights." I was verifying their compliance distance for the next meeting. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You broke into my yard to measure my lights?" Karen's lips thinned. "Technically, this section touches community land. You should have measured yourself before installing anything." I was so stunned I couldn't even speak. Finally I said, "Karen, go home. Please." Before I actually call the cops this time. For a second, I thought she'd argue again, but she turned and stomped away, muttering under her breath about violations and reports. The following week, I got the letter. A thick white envelope with the HOA logo on top. Inside was a formal complaint citing unauthorized modifications impacting neighboring property aesthetics. It demanded I remove the motion lights immediately or face a $500 fine. I sat at my kitchen table, reading it 3 times over, feeling both angry and amused. The reason listed at the bottom made me laugh out loud. Complaint initiated by resident of 14 Maplewood Drive. Karen's address. Of course. Instead of getting mad, I decided to handle it differently this time. I made copies of the security footage from my doorbell camera, the one showing Karen sneaking around my yard at midnight, and attached them to an email I sent to the HOA board. My message was short. If we're talking about unauthorized actions, perhaps this video should be reviewed too. Then I waited. 2 days later, I got a reply. The HOA president, a woman named Marilyn, wanted to discuss the matter privately. That was a first. Most people said Marilyn was quiet but fair, a retired teacher who only joined the HOA to keep things organized. She invited me to the next board meeting. When I arrived, the small community hall smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. About a dozen people sat around folding tables, whispering quietly. Karen sat near the front, looking smug. "Thank you for coming," Marilyn said, adjusting her glasses. "We've reviewed both the complaint and your response." Karen immediately spoke up. "It's obvious. His lights are disruptive. They shine directly into my windows, and he refuses to follow procedure." Marilyn raised a hand. "Mrs. Duffy, please. We'll let Mr. Harris respond." I stood, keeping my tone calm. I installed standard motion lights to prevent break-ins. I checked the HOA rules before doing so. There's no clause banning them. And as you can see in the footage I sent, someone was on my property tampering with one of the lights. All eyes turned to Karen. Her face went pale. That's out of context," she stammered. "I was ensuring compliance." One of the board members, a man I didn't know, frowned. "At midnight?" Marilyn leaned forward. "Mrs. Duffy, this is concerning. Entering another resident's property without consent is a violation of HOA policy. We'll need to discuss this." Karen opened and closed her mouth like a fish. "You can't, he's..." But Marilyn's calm voice cut through. "Until this matter is resolved, the board will not enforce the fine. Mr. Harris's lights may remain for safety purposes." I thanked them and left. As I walked out, I caught Karen glaring at me, her jaw tight, her hands trembling slightly. That was the first time I'd ever seen her truly lose control. For a few days after that, things were quiet. No angry notes on my door. No complaints. The neighborhood even seemed friendlier. Neighbors waved again, and Mr. Hopkins dropped by with some tomatoes from his garden. He laughed as he handed them over. "You gave Karen a taste of her own medicine. Whole place has been buzzing about it." I smiled. I didn't want to embarrass her, but she left me no choice. Mr. Hopkins nodded. "You handled it better than most would have." It felt nice, peaceful again. For the first time since moving in, I thought maybe the worst was behind me. But peace in Maplewood never lasted. That Friday night as I sat watching TV, the motion lights suddenly flared bright, every single one of them. I frowned, checking the monitor. Movement registered at multiple points: driveway, side lawn, back gate. I stepped outside, heart pounding. At first, I saw nothing. Then I heard it. A low scraping sound near my fence. I turned and froze. Someone was cutting through the wooden panel at the back of my yard. And this time, it wasn't Karen. The sound of the saw against the wood sent a cold chill through my chest. I stood completely still on the porch, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The scraping stopped for a moment, then started again, faster, this time sharper, more deliberate. Whoever was there wasn't sneaking anymore. They were determined. I moved slowly down the steps, my eyes locked on the corner of the yard where the shadows thickened. My security lights followed me, one flicking on after the other, bathing the grass in pale white. The scraping stopped again, then a low whisper cut through the silence. "Hey, someone's coming." There was more than one person. My heart raced. I didn't want to get too close, not without a plan. I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit record on the camera. Then I shouted, "I see you. You're on camera." A muffled curse, the clatter of tools, and then footsteps, 2, maybe 3 sets running away behind the fence. I dashed toward the back gate and just caught a glimpse of movement. 2 men in dark hoodies disappearing between the neighbors' hedges. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a prank or some bored teens. They were cutting through the fence into my yard. I called the police immediately. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up, their lights flashing blue across the quiet street. The same officer who had come before Officer Miller recognized me right away. "Back again, huh?" he said, though this time there was no amusement in his voice. "They tried to cut through my fence," I said quickly. 2 guys, maybe 3. They ran toward the creek behind Maplewood Drive. Miller nodded, signaling to his partner. They split up and started searching the area. I showed them the footage from my phone, blurry, but enough to see the shapes, the fence shaking, and the tools in their hands. One of the other neighbors came outside, rubbing his eyes. "Everything okay out here?" Before I could answer, a familiar voice chimed in from across the street. "Oh, for heaven's sake, again?" "Karen." She stood on her porch, wrapped in a pink robe, glaring at the flashing police lights like they were personally offending her. I turned toward her. "Karen, this isn't about the lights. Someone just tried to break in." She crossed her arms. "Or maybe your lights attracted them. Thieves see bright lights, they think expensive equipment. You've made us all targets." I blinked, speechless. "You think my security lights invited burglars?" Karen's chin lifted higher. "It's possible. All this attention, the police cars. The drama, it's ruining our neighborhood's image." Officer Miller looked like he wanted to laugh but caught himself. "Ma'am, there's evidence someone tried to break into his yard. He did the right thing calling us." Karen muttered something and went back inside, slamming her door. After the police left, I patched the hole in the fence with some spare wood and metal brackets. My hands trembled as I worked. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but I felt something worse. Unsettled. Vulnerable. Like the safety I'd tried so hard to build was slipping away. Around midnight, I sat by the window watching the lights outside. Every time they flicked on, my chest tightened a little. I thought about moving the sensors, maybe narrowing the angles, but no. The system worked. It had done exactly what it was meant to do. Warn me. Still, one question burned in my mind. How did they know where to cut? That section of the fence wasn't visible from the road. The only people who'd ever been back there were HOA inspectors. And Karen. I shook the thought off. It was probably a coincidence. Probably. The next morning, I was out front fixing my mailbox post when Mr. Hopkins came by again. He looked worried. "Heard the ruckus last night. You all right, son?" "Yeah," I said. "Fence took some damage, but nothing too bad." He frowned. "This neighborhood used to be so quiet. Then the HOA started focusing more on appearances than safety. Can't say I'm surprised this happened." I leaned on the post. "You think they'll take it seriously now?" He sighed. "Karen, not a chance. But Marilyn might. She's got a level head." I nodded, grateful for at least one sane person on the board. "Thanks, Mr. Hopkins." He patted my shoulder before heading home. "Keep those lights on. Don't let anyone bully you out of protecting yourself." That stuck with me all day. By evening, I decided to do a little test. I adjusted the range on the backyard lights to reach slightly further, just enough to cover the full length of the fence. Then I added a small solar-powered light near the creek, where the intruders had escaped. It wasn't bright, but it was enough to catch any movement. Everything seemed quiet again, peaceful, at least until I got another knock on my door. It was a delivery guy holding a manila envelope. "For you, sir," Certified delivery. I signed for it, confused. When I opened it, my heart sank. Another HOA notice. This one was longer, thicker, and far more aggressive. You are hereby notified that your property lighting system constitutes a public nuisance and an invasion of privacy. You have 48 hours to remove or disable all external lighting fixtures or face legal action and daily fines. At the bottom, in bold, signed, HOA Board Chair, Karen Duffy. So that was her next move. I immediately called Marilyn, the president. She answered after a few rings. "Marilyn, I just got another notice," I said, reading it out. She groaned. "Oh, for crying out loud." I told her we're still investigating the previous complaint. She wasn't authorized to send that. "So, what now?" I asked. "Forward it to me," she said firmly. "And don't remove those lights. I'll deal with Karen." I did exactly that. Later that night, I was on my porch again when I saw movement across the street. Karen's living room lights flicked on. She stood near her window, phone in hand, staring directly at my house. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, a silent standoff across the dark street. Then, one of my motion lights flicked on, and her entire porch lit up like daylight. Her face turned red even from where I stood. She pulled her blinds shut so fast they rattled. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not mockingly, not cruelly, just a quiet, tired laugh. After everything, she still didn't realize that my lights weren't aimed at her on purpose. Her house just happened to be inside the range of my security zone. And she was the one who had fought hardest to keep that setup from existing in the first place. By midnight, I was finally ready to sleep when my phone buzzed. A new notification from my security system popped up. Alert. Motion detected. Front lawn. I tapped the screen. A shadow stood near my mailbox, just standing there, unmoving. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then the shape shifted. A person, watching my house. The timestamp ticked. 5 seconds. 10. Then the figure slowly lifted something, a spray can, and began painting over my mailbox. I froze. Then they turned, and for a brief, blinding second, my front light flicked on and the face came into view. It was Karen. The sight froze me in place. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen, the self-proclaimed guardian of Maplewood's rules, the same woman who had called the police on me for breaking HOA regulations, was crouched by my mailbox in the middle of the night, spray painting over my property number. I stared at the screen, heart pounding so hard I could hear it. My motion lights had captured everything in crisp, clear detail. Her fluffy pink robe, her slippers, even the can of black spray paint glinting in her hand. I whispered to myself, "You've got to be kidding me." The security camera caught her pausing, glancing around nervously, then continuing to paint until my address numbers were completely covered in thick black paint. She stepped back, tilted her head, and smirked at her work before marching back toward her own house. I was torn between anger and disbelief. I didn't want to deal with another confrontation, but I also knew this couldn't slide. I replayed the footage again, this time zooming in just to be sure. No mistake. It was definitely her. I barely slept that night. By morning, I already had a plan. I printed out still frames from the video and took them straight to Marilyn, the HOA president. She opened the door to her home office, still in her robe, clearly surprised to see me so early. "Good morning, Tom. What's going on?" I handed her the photos. "This happened last night." She looked down, her face tightening as she examined the images. "Oh no," she murmured. "She vandalized my property," I said calmly. "I caught her red-handed, and I want this on record." Marilyn looked horrified. "She can't do this." I told her to stop escalating things. "She didn't," I said flatly. "She made it worse." Marilyn sighed deeply. "Leave these with me. I'll call an emergency board meeting. And Tom, try to stay calm, okay? We'll handle it properly." I nodded, though the anger boiling in my chest made calm the hardest thing to be. By mid-morning, the neighborhood was already buzzing. Word spread fast in Maplewood. I noticed a few neighbors stopping by my mailbox, staring at the blacked-out numbers, whispering among themselves. Then came Karen. She walked up my driveway, her head held high, pretending she didn't notice the mess she'd made. Her voice was fake sweet. "Oh my, what happened to your mailbox?" I met her eyes. "You tell me, Karen. You were here last night, remember?" She blinked, pretending confusion. "Excuse me? I was asleep. I don't know what you're talking about." I smiled, the kind of smile that hides a storm. "That's funny. My cameras caught you doing it." Her expression faltered for a split second. Then she scoffed. "Ha, cameras lie. Those lights mess with shadows. Anyone could look like anyone." "Oh, really?" I asked quietly. "Then I guess you won't mind if the HOA reviews the footage, and the police." Her face went pale. "Police?" "Yes, Karen," I said, stepping closer. "It's vandalism. You damaged federal property too. Mailboxes count, you know." She stared at me, mouth opening and closing, before she turned sharply and stormed off toward her house. That evening, Marilyn called. "We just finished the emergency session," she said. "Karen admitted to touching your mailbox, but she's claiming it was a misunderstanding. She said she was trying to clean graffiti she thought someone else put there." I couldn't help but laugh. "In the middle of the night? With black paint?" "I know," Marilyn said. "No one's buying it. We're issuing a formal censure and removing her from her board position pending review." Finally, some justice. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to take humiliation quietly. For a few days, things seemed calm. The air felt lighter. A few neighbors even stopped by to check on me. Mr. Hopkins dropped off a slice of his famous apple pie, saying, "You handled that with class, son. The rest of us have been tired of her antics for years." I thanked him sincerely. "Honestly, I just want peace." He smiled sadly. "You deserve it. But with people like her, peace never lasts long." He was right. That Friday night, I noticed something odd. My front security light, the same one that had captured Karen's mailbox stunt, wasn't turning on anymore. I went outside to check. The wiring was fine, the bulb intact, but the small circuit box near the base looked tampered with. Someone had popped it open and snipped the wire clean. I exhaled sharply. Unbelievable. I repaired it the next day, replacing the cable and locking the box shut. I added a small camera facing the area just in case anyone tried again. On Sunday morning, I decided to take a walk around the block. The sun was bright, and for the first time in weeks, the neighborhood actually felt friendly again. Kids were riding bikes, dogs barked, and people waved at me without hesitation. As I walked past Karen's house, though, I noticed something that stopped me dead. Her front yard was glowing. Bright, blinding white light identical to mine covered her entire driveway and porch. At first, I thought it was a prank. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't new lights. It was my lights, the ones I'd installed for my security zone. The sensors had been re-angled somehow, shifting their field. Now, they perfectly illuminated her entire house, every time a car drove by or someone walked near. She must have noticed too, because just then, her blinds flew open and she appeared at the window, furious. She pointed directly at my house, yelling something I couldn't hear through the glass. Then she stormed outside, still in her robe, and shouted across the street, "You did this on purpose." I raised my hands innocently. "Did what?" "The lights are motion-based. Maybe they're just doing their job." Her face turned bright red. "You're harassing me." I shrugged. "Karen, I haven't touched a thing since last week. Maybe karma's just better at lighting than I am." She screamed something unintelligible and slammed her door. Later that night, Marilyn called again. "Karen filed another complaint," she said tiredly. "She's saying your lights are targeting her property." "Marilyn," I said, "those lights haven't moved an inch. I even have photos showing their original placement." "I know," she said. "We believe you. Honestly, the board's done with this nonsense. We're sending her an official cease and desist notice. If she continues, we'll involve the HOA attorney." Finally, I thought, maybe this nightmare was ending. But around midnight, just as I started to relax, I heard it again, that faint scraping sound near the fence. I jumped up, grabbed my flashlight, and ran outside. The lights flicked on instantly, flooding the yard. And there, standing just beyond the fence, was Karen holding a pair of wire cutters. The blue and red lights flashed outside my window again that night. Only this time, I wasn't the one who had called. It was Karen. For the 5th time in less than a month. My heart sank when I saw her pointing toward my house, her voice sharp and shrill as the police officer stood there looking half asleep and clearly tired of her antics. "She's doing it again," she shouted, her face glowing in the harsh light. "Those lights of hers are spying on my home. They keep turning on every time I move around in my own yard." I rubbed my eyes and stepped outside calmly, trying not to show how exhausted I was. "Karen," I said, "they're motion lights. They come on when anything moves. Squirrels, cars, the wind blowing a branch." "Don't you gaslight me, miss," she snapped, crossing her arms. "I know what you're doing. You're using those fancy lights to monitor me." The police officer sighed and looked at me apologetically. Ma'am, we've already explained to her 3 times that motion lights are legal. But, would you mind turning them off for the night so we can clear this up? I wanted to refuse. Deep down, I knew Karen was doing this to wear me down, to make me regret ever standing up to her. But I also knew escalating things wouldn't help. So I nodded and said, fine, for tonight. As I turned the lights off from my phone, I couldn't help but notice Karen's smug little smile. She actually winked at me before turning back toward her house. It took everything in me not to react. When the officers left, I leaned against my porch railing and took a deep breath. The night was darker than usual, without the motion lights. For the first time since I'd installed them, I realized how eerie it felt without that warm, reassuring glow. My security camera still covered everything, but I didn't like the darkness. It didn't feel safe. That feeling was justified an hour later. A loud crash shattered the silence. I jumped to my feet and ran toward the sound. It was coming from the side of my house. My hands trembled as I turned the corner, only to see a shadow darting away toward the trees. Someone had thrown a rock through my side window. Glass glistened on the ground like tiny diamonds. My stomach turned cold. Was this Karen trying to scare me, or someone taking advantage of the blackout? Either way, I realized my kindness had just put me at risk. I immediately turned the motion lights back on. The yard flooded with light, chasing the darkness away. My camera notifications went wild, movement alerts everywhere. I opened the live feed and froze. There was a figure, short, stocky, moving quickly, ducking behind Karen's fence. For a moment, I couldn't process it. My mind raced between fear, anger, and disbelief. Was Karen outside during all this, or was someone using her yard as cover? The thought that she might be involved gnawed at me, but another part of me didn't want to believe it. I had to know. So I did something risky. I walked out, flashlight in hand, and called out, "Who's there?" There was silence except for the faint sound of footsteps crunching leaves. Then, suddenly, Karen's porch light flipped on. Her voice echoed through the night, sharp and defensive. "Why are you outside my house?" I blinked. "Someone just broke my window. I saw movement behind your fence." "That's ridiculous," she barked. "You're just trying to blame me now, aren't you? You people think you can bully me." Her door slammed shut. I stood there, staring at her fence, a chill running down my spine. I wasn't sure what was worse, the thought that Karen might have had something to do with it, or that someone else was creeping around both our homes. Either way, I wasn't sleeping that night. The next morning, I filed a police report about the vandalism. The officer who came out was the same one from the night before. He scratched his head and said, "You could say that," I replied, forcing a tired smile. "I just want to make sure my house and everyone around me is safe." He took notes, then looked toward Karen's home. "You know, her place is right on the edge of your property line. Those cameras of yours probably caught more than you think." That thought stayed with me all day. When I finally sat down to review the footage, I noticed something strange. One of the figures moving near my window had a distinct reflective vest, like the kind utility workers wear. But there hadn't been any scheduled maintenance in our area that week. And then I saw something even stranger. The same figure stopped for a moment, turned toward Karen's front door, and placed something small near her porch before darting away. My heart thumped. What was that? A package? A note? I zoomed in, but the glare from my lights made it hard to tell. Curiosity got the better of me. As soon as I saw Karen's car pull out of the driveway later that afternoon, I walked over to her porch. There, half hidden under her welcome mat, was a small black device. A tracker. I recognized it instantly. It was a Bluetooth GPS tag, the kind people use for keys or luggage. Someone had been watching her, and my lights had caught it. Suddenly, everything made a terrifying kind of sense. Karen's paranoia, her fear of being spied on, her anger at me. It wasn't just because of the lights. Something else was going on, and she was too scared to admit it. That realization didn't make me hate her. It made me pity her. But it also made me determined to get to the truth. That night, I placed the tracker in a small evidence bag and called the police again. The same officer answered. I told him everything, down to the timestamp of the footage. When he arrived, I showed him the device. His face went serious. "We'll take this in. You might have just uncovered something big here." Karen, however, didn't see it that way. When she saw the officer leaving my porch again, she stormed over, demanding answers. "What lies are you telling them about me now?" she shouted. pointing her finger right in my face. "I'm trying to help you, Karen," I said softly. "Someone's been watching you." Her expression faltered for just a second. Fear flickered across her face, but then her pride took over. "Don't you dare pretend to care. You're just trying to get me kicked out of the HOA. She turned and stomped away before I could say another word. I stood there in the fading sunlight, feeling equal parts frustrated and sad. I tried to be kind. I tried to understand. But sometimes, fear blinds people to the truth even when it's right in front of them. Little did I know, that tracker wasn't the only surprise waiting to be uncovered, and the next one would make both of our lives turn upside down. The night after the tracker was found, I couldn't sleep. Every little creak in the house made my pulse jump. I kept thinking about that small, black tag the officer took away. Who would plant something like that on Karen's porch? And more importantly, why? The next morning, I checked my cameras again. My security system had become both my comfort and my obsession. I scrolled through the footage from the night before, fast-forwarding past the hours of stillness, until I froze. There at 2:43 a.m., a shadowy figure moved again. Only this time, it wasn't near my home. It was in Karen's yard. The figure stayed close to her windows, moving slowly, deliberately. It wasn't just passing through, it was watching. I felt my stomach twist. Whoever this was, they weren't random troublemakers. This was targeted. I printed a still image from the footage and circled the outline. The person was wearing the same reflective vest as before. That meant they'd been back after the tracker was removed. It was clear now. Karen's paranoia hadn't come from nowhere. Something real was happening to her. Still, I couldn't just knock on her door and tell her what I'd seen. Not after how she'd yelled at me last night. She'd probably accuse me of doctoring the footage. So, I decided to do something smarter. I took the footage and went straight to the police station. The officer I'd spoken with before, Officer Daniels, recognized me immediately. "Back again, huh?" he said, half smiling. "Yeah," I replied, sliding the printed photo across the counter. "Same guy." He came back. He looked at the image, his brow furrowing. "We're already checking the tracker for fingerprints and Bluetooth connections," he said. "But this might help us connect the dots." "Do you think Karen's in danger?" I asked quietly. He sighed. "Honestly, maybe. But she's not exactly the kind of person who cooperates easily. If we try to warn her, she might just shut the door in our faces." That part, I knew was true. Karen's pride was as big as her temper. I drove home with a heavy heart. It was strange. I should have felt satisfied knowing I was right about the lights and the cameras all along, but I didn't. I just felt sad. Because behind all of Karen's noise, I realized there was fear. Real fear. When I got home, I noticed something odd. My front gate was slightly open. I always closed it before leaving. Always. My heart started racing. I scanned the yard, looking for anything out of place. That's when I saw it, a faint red light blinking near one of my side bushes. I crouched down slowly and brushed the leaves aside. Another camera. But it wasn't mine. It was small, black, and cleverly hidden. The lens faced directly at my front porch. Someone had installed a secret camera on my property. My throat went dry. Was this the same person who was stalking Karen? Or was this something else entirely? I unscrewed the small device and turned it over in my hand. It looked like a simple Wi-Fi camera, but one detail stood out. HOA Security, property of Meadow Ridge Association. Expensive. I froze. The HOA had installed cameras without my knowledge on my private property? That was illegal. And if this one was here, how many more were hidden around the neighborhood? My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" I said cautiously. A familiar voice answered. "You shouldn't have touched that." My heart nearly stopped. "Who is this?" There was a pause. Then the voice continued. "That camera belongs to the HOA. You're interfering with community safety." "Karen." I felt anger bubbling up. "Community safety? Karen, that camera was inside my fence. You have no right to install anything on my property." "You think your little gadgets make you special?" she sneered. "But the HOA has its own security network. Maybe if you weren't hiding things, we wouldn't have to keep an eye on you." My jaw clenched. "Karen, you're the one who's been watched. Someone planted a tracker on your porch. The police are investigating." She hung up. I stood there for a long time, phone still in my hand, trying to calm my breathing. It all made sense now. She wasn't just paranoid, she was trying to take control. Maybe she thought if she spied first, she could stay ahead of whoever was watching her. But this had gone too far. I took pictures of the hidden camera from every angle, documenting exactly where I found it. Then I emailed everything to Officer Daniels, along with Karen's call recording. His reply came within minutes. "Don't confront her again. Let us handle this. We'll get a warrant to check HOA's surveillance records." That message gave me some relief, but also dread. If the HOA had cameras on private land, this could turn into a serious legal mess. And Karen, being part of the HOA board, might have dragged herself into something she couldn't control. That night, I walked through my yard again, scanning for more blinking lights. I found 2 more hidden cameras, one near the mailbox, another facing my driveway, both labeled the same way. I removed them carefully and locked them inside my shed. Then I turned on my motion lights again. The yard glowed bright and wide, casting long shadows across the fences. I looked toward Karen's house. Her curtains twitched. She was watching. "Go ahead," I muttered to myself. "Watch all you want." Hours passed, and just as I was starting to relax, a loud knock hit my door. My heart jumped into my throat. I checked my phone. It was past midnight. I peeked through the peephole and froze. It was Karen. She stood there in her robe, hair messy, eyes wide. But this time, there was no anger, just pure panic. I hesitated before opening the door. "Karen?" "They're back," she whispered. "Someone's outside my window. I can hear them breathing." My instincts took over. I grabbed my flashlight and followed her across the lawn. Her front door was still open, and when I stepped inside, I saw her. Living room was in disarray, drawers pulled open, papers on the floor. Then, through her kitchen window, I saw it movement, a figure sprinting toward the woods behind her house. I darted out the back door, shining the flashlight into the darkness, but they were gone. Karen clutched her robe and sank to her knees, trembling. For the first time, I saw her not as an enemy, but as a scared woman completely out of her depth. "It's okay," I said gently. "You're safe now. My cameras caught everything." Her eyes widened. "Your cameras?" "Yes," I said softly. "They're motion activated. The lights, the cameras, they saw him. Whoever he is, we'll catch him." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a shaky breath, she whispered, Maybe I was wrong about you." It was the first time I'd ever heard her voice that small. But before I could respond, a new light appeared in the distance, flashing red and blue again. The police were back. And this time, they weren't just coming for a noise complaint. They were coming because my cameras had caught something big. Something none of us were ready for. The flashing lights from the patrol cars lit up the entire street like a crime scene straight out of a TV show. Officers moved around with flashlights, marking spots in Karen's backyard and taking photos. I stood near my fence, still catching my breath. Karen sat on her porch steps, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had given her. For once, she wasn't shouting. She just looked small. Officer Daniels approached me, his expression a mix of fatigue and focus. "Your cameras caught him, all right," he said. "Good footage, too. Whoever this is, they've been circling the neighborhood for weeks." I frowned. "Weeks?" He nodded. "We've had a few reports of prowlers, but never this clear of a recording. He's wearing the same vest every time." And get this, the tracker from Karen's porch pinged near an abandoned utility shed about a mile from here. A chill ran through me. "So he's watching us from there?" "Maybe," Daniel said. "But it's too early to tell. We're sending a team in the morning to sweep the area." Karen finally looked up from where she sat, her eyes red. "You're saying someone's been watching me? All this time?" The officer nodded gently. "Yes, ma'am. It looks that way." Her lips trembled. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked human, fragile. Not the bossy HOA enforcer who yelled about mailboxes or lawns, but a frightened neighbor who just wanted to feel safe. I walked over slowly and crouched beside her. "Karen," I said softly, "I tried to tell you before. You weren't crazy. Someone really was watching." She turned her head toward me, her voice shaking. "I thought it was you. I thought your lights and cameras were spying on me." "I know," I said, "but those lights probably scared him off half the time. That's why I put them up." She blinked, processing my words. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry. It wasn't much. But it was real. And after everything that had happened, it was enough." The officers spent hours searching her yard, combing through every corner. Finally, one of them called out, "We found something." We hurried over, flashlights pointing toward the edge of the yard near the back fence. There, half buried in the mud, were deep boot prints leading into the woods. Daniels crouched down, measuring the stride. Same pattern as the ones from the footage, he said. He must have stood right here, watching her window. Karen clutched her blanket tighter. "Oh my God," she whispered. Daniels looked at both of us. "Whoever this guy is, he's bold. But he's not careful. We'll get him." The rest of the night passed in a blur of police chatter and flashing lights. When they finally packed up and left, I walked Karen back to her door. She hesitated before going in. "Would you?" she started, then paused, embarrassed. "Would you leave your motion lights on tonight?" I smiled softly. "Already done." When I got back home, the adrenaline finally wore off. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the footage again. The figure's movements were methodical, deliberate. He wasn't stumbling around like a random thief. He knew where to look. That meant he'd studied us. But how? I zoomed in on one frame where the intruder turned slightly toward the camera. His face was mostly shadowed, but a small patch of light reflected off his vest, a faded logo. I squinted and paused the video. The letters were faint but visible. Meadow Ridge, HOA Maintenance. My blood ran cold. That was our HOA. The same organization that had installed illegal cameras on my property. The same one Karen proudly represented. Could one of their maintenance workers be behind this? The next morning, I went straight to the HOA office. It was a small, neat building near the community entrance. A friendly-looking clerk smiled as I walked in. "Morning. How can I help you?" "I need to see the maintenance roster," I said calmly. "There's been a break-in. Police are investigating." Her smile faltered. "Oh. We're not allowed to share employee information without board approval." "I'm sure the police can request it," I said, my tone steady. "But it'll look better for the HOA if you cooperate now." She hesitated, then reluctantly opened a binder. "Well, our maintenance contractor is Mr. Keller. He handles lighting, irrigation, and the grounds." "Why?" I took a photo of the page. "Has he been around lately?" She nodded. "Every few days. He checks the drainage system near the woods." Near the woods? My stomach sank. That was where the tracker had pinged. That evening, I showed Officer Daniels the footage and the photo from the HOA binder. His expression darkened immediately. "We've had run-ins with Keller before," he said. "Trespassing complaints, always dismissed because he claimed to be working on HOA business." "Could he have been using that excuse to spy on people?" I asked. Daniels nodded grimly. "Wouldn't be the first time. We'll bring him in." Hours later, I watched from my window as police cruisers rolled up near the old maintenance shed at the edge of the woods. Karen stood beside me, her arms folded nervously. We both watched the scene unfold in silence. After about 20 minutes, officers led someone out, a man in a reflective vest, his face lit by the harsh flashlights. Even from this distance, I recognized him from the footage. It was Keller. Karen gasped softly. "That's him. He came to my house last month to check the gutters. He said there were leaks." Daniels later told us they'd found more trackers inside the shed, along with old security cameras and stolen mail from several homes. Keller had been using his maintenance job as a cover to spy on residents and collect information. The worst part? He'd tapped into the HOA's network of security feeds. He could see everything. When the officers drove him away, Karen sank down onto my porch step, silent for a long moment. "I thought you were the problem," she finally whispered. "But you were protecting us." I smiled faintly. "Maybe now you understand why I believe in good security." She nodded slowly. "And maybe I understand why you believe in kindness. You didn't have to help me." "Everyone deserves to feel safe," I said quietly. "Even you, Karen." For the first time, she laughed, a small, broken laugh, but genuine. That night, the neighborhood felt different. The air was still tense, but lighter somehow, as if the fear had lifted just a little. I turned my motion lights on again and watched them illuminate both our yards. Karen's curtains stayed open this time. She didn't hide. She waved at me before going inside. It wasn't peace yet, but it was a start. But peace, I would soon learn, doesn't last long in Meadow Ridge, because as the police investigated Keller, they found something far more unsettling on his laptop. He hadn't just been watching Karen and me. He'd been streaming our entire neighborhood, live. To someone else? When Officer Daniels called me early the next morning, his tone told me everything before his words did. "It wasn't over. We need to talk," he said flatly. "It's about Keller's laptop." I felt my stomach knot. "What did you find?" There was a pause. "You'd better come down to the station. It's easier if you see it yourself. The drive there felt endless. Every turn of the wheel seemed to echo the same thought in my mind. If Keller had been streaming us live, then who was he streaming to? When I walked into the station, Daniels and another detective were waiting. They led me into a small office where a laptop sat open on the table. The screen displayed several video thumbnails, each one labeled with an address from our neighborhood. My neighborhood. My voice trembled. Are those? Daniels nodded. Live feeds. Keller had them saved to a hidden folder. Some were from the HOA cameras, but others were private systems. Yours included. I stepped closer. One of the thumbnails showed my front porch. Another showed Karen's driveway. Another chillingly showed the interior of someone's living room. He was hacking into home security systems. Daniels continued. Most of these are commercial-grade cameras, smart doorbells, motion lights, Wi-Fi systems. Looks like he was selling the live feeds online. I swallowed hard. Selling them? Yeah, the detective said. There's a whole black market for that stuff. People pay to watch hidden neighborhood feeds. We traced several IP addresses overseas. I felt sick. All this time, while we'd been arguing over motion lights and HOA rules, people had been watching us like we were part of some twisted reality show. Daniels clicked on a file labeled Zone, Camera, X5. The video opened, showing a split screen of multiple angles around my home. But then, as the footage played, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. A faint red outline marked the edge of each video frame, stretching beyond my property across the street, over the fence, even reaching part of Karen's home. Daniels looked at me. Recognize that? I nodded slowly. That's the range of my motion lights, the security zone. He leaned forward. Exactly. Keller must have mapped your system to use as part of his network coverage. Your motion zone was feeding into his database. So when Karen said my lights were spying on her, she wasn't wrong. Daniels finished grimly. Not at first. Keller had your setup hijacked. Every time your lights came on, it triggered a recording to his server. The words hit me like a punch. My security, the thing I'd trusted to keep everyone safe, had been weaponized. I ran my fingers through my hair, feeling both angry and guilty. How long has this been going on? The detective replied. We're estimating at least 6 months. Brother. 6 months. That meant this all started long before I'd moved in. Keller had probably been watching every new resident that joined Meadow Ridge. And maybe that's why Karen had become so paranoid. She'd sensed something was wrong long before anyone believed her. Daniels noticed my expression. You couldn't have known. None of you could. What matters is you caught him. But even as he said that, I couldn't shake the unease twisting in my gut. Because Keller wasn't the kind of man who acted alone. That night, I sat on my porch staring at the glow from my motion lights. The air was cool and still, the kind of quiet that usually brings peace, but not tonight. I replayed everything in my head. The tracker, the hidden cameras, the live feeds. And the question that kept haunting me was simple. Who was buying them? I didn't have long to wonder. At around 10 p.m., Karen knocked on my door. She looked tired, but not angry, just worried. The police told me about Keller, she said softly. But there's something else. She held out a manila envelope. My name was scribbled on the front in shaky handwriting. This was in my mailbox, she said. No stamp, just dropped there. My chest tightened. I took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside were printed screenshots, dozens of them. Each one showed stills from my camera feed, time-stamped and zoomed in, and at the bottom of the pile was a photo of me standing on my porch, looking right at the camera. Karen, I whispered, my throat dry. When did this show up? Just an hour ago, she said. I thought it was from the police, but then I saw your name. I didn't want to open it alone. I studied the photos closer. One of them had a faint watermark in the corner, MRHOA. Net. I frowned. That's the HOA's internal network ID. Karen looked confused. You mean these came from our HOA servers? I nodded slowly. Looks that way. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The implications hung in the air like a storm cloud. If Keller had access to the HOA's network, and these screenshots came after his arrest, someone else still had control. We need to tell the police, Karen said quickly. We will, I replied. But first, I need to see where these came from. Karen's eyes widened. You're not seriously going to? Yes, I said firmly. The HOA office has a backup server for all their cameras. If someone's still inside the system, I can trace the connection. Against her protests, I grabbed my laptop and drove to the HOA building. The lot was empty, the lights off, but I still had my keycard from when I'd signed up as a new homeowner. I swiped in, the door clicked open, and the cold air hit me. Inside, everything looked normal, neatly stacked folders, a faint hum from the server closet. I booted up my laptop and connected to the local network. Karen stood beside me, wringing her hands. "This is crazy," she muttered. "If we get caught..." But before she could finish, lines of code began scrolling across my screen. Someone was actively logged in. I froze. "They're in the system right now." Karen's eyes darted to the door. "Who?" "I don't know yet," I said, typing rapidly. "But I can see their access point. Wait." The terminal blinked, and the location pinged on a digital map. The signal wasn't coming from outside the neighborhood. It was coming from inside the HOA office. "Right here." Karen's breath hitched. No, that can't be." Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from the hallway, the creak of a door hinge. I turned off my screen light and motioned for her to stay quiet. Footsteps, slow, steady, coming closer. Then a voice, low, male, calm. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Karen's grip tightened on my arm. We turned toward the sound, and there, standing at the end of the corridor, was Mr. Harris, the HOA president. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Curiosity," he said softly, stepping closer, "can be dangerous in this neighborhood." The fluorescent lights flickered above us, casting his shadow long and thin against the wall. And that's when I realized Keller wasn't the mastermind. He was just the pawn. For a split second, the sound of my own heartbeat drowned out everything else. Harris's calm, measured steps echoed down the hallway as he advanced toward us, his shoes clicking against the tile like a metronome. Karen's hand trembled against my sleeve, her breath catching in shallow gasps. "Mr. Harris," I began cautiously, forcing my voice to stay even. "What are you doing here this late?" He smiled faintly, as though amused by the question. "Same as you, I imagine, making sure everything is secure." My laptop screen still glowed faintly on the desk beside me, displaying the line of code I'd frozen mid-trace, the one showing his device ID logged into the HOA server. I angled my body slightly, hoping he couldn't see it. Karen's voice was brittle. "You were the one in the system, weren't you? Those screenshots came from you." His smile faded. "Karen, you've always had such an active imagination." He took another step closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. The way he said her name, it wasn't the dismissive tone of a bored HOA president anymore. It was something colder, controlled, predatory. I moved subtly, placing myself between him and Karen. "You should know the police are already tracing Keller's digital trail," I said. "If you're connected to any of it, they'll find out." That stopped him for a moment. His eyes flicked toward my laptop, calculating. Then he exhaled slowly. "You really have no idea, do you?" The lights overhead flickered once, twice, and then steadied. Harris turned and walked toward the glass window overlooking the neighborhood street. "When I took over the HOA 3 years ago," he began, "this community was dying. Houses were sitting empty, property values dropping. No one wanted to live here." He turned back toward us. "So I fixed it." Karen's brow furrowed. "By spying on people?" "By protecting them," he snapped. "You think those cameras were about control? They were about security. We had break-ins, theft, vandalism. The police did nothing, so I built a system that did." "Except you didn't stop there," I said. "You let Keller sell access to those feeds." His jaw tightened. "Keller went rogue. He was supposed to monitor for threats, not profit from them. When I found out, I tried to cut him off. By letting him take the fall," I said bitterly. He didn't deny it. He was unstable. It was only a matter of time before he slipped. I just nudged things along. Karen looked at him in disbelief. "You ruined a man's life, and you've been invading everyone's privacy. That's not protection, that's control." Harris's expression hardened. "You talk like you know what it's like to hold responsibility for 100 homes, 100 families. But you don't. People need order, structure. Without it, neighborhoods crumble." I glanced at my screen again. The connection log was still active. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. If I could get a clean capture of his session, the evidence would be undeniable, but I'd have to keep him talking. "You're right about one thing," I said carefully. "You built a system that works. You just built it for the wrong reasons. He tilted his head, studying me. You're smarter than Keller, but that makes you dangerous. Before I could react, he reached into his jacket pocket. Karen gasped, stepping back, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a small black remote. With a click, the server rack behind him came alive, its lights flashing rapidly. The monitors on the wall filled with live camera feeds, streets, driveways, porches, even inside several homes. Ours among them. There, Harris said quietly. You see what I see. The system's already integrated. Every motion sensor, every smart doorbell, every phone that's ever connected to this network, it all reports here. Karen's voice shook. You're insane. No, he said calmly. I'm vigilant. I stepped toward the console. And how do the overseas IPs fit into your vigilance? The people paying for these feeds? He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I started typing, fast routing a copy of the server logs to an external drive on my laptop. Harris noticed, lunging forward. I yanked the laptop back, clutching it to my chest. Don't, he barked. Or what? I snapped. You'll add me to your list of surveillance targets? His composure cracked for the first time. You don't understand who's watching this data. Shutting it down isn't an option anymore. Karen's voice was small, terrified. Then who's watching? Harris looked past us, out the dark window where the quiet street glowed under the lamplight. Let's just say Keller didn't build the network from scratch. He had funding. I exchanged a glance with Karen. From where? He smiled again. That same cold smile. Do you really think a small-town HOA could afford a system like this? We're part of a pilot project, private surveillance for gated communities. Only, this gate, he gestured vaguely toward the window, is bigger than you think. I could feel the chill running up my spine. Who's funding it? Before he could reply, the monitors flashed red. A loud ping echoed from the server. Someone else had just logged in remotely. Harris froze, his face tightening. What did you do? He hissed. Nothing, I said. Looks like your investors just joined the conversation. The feeds began to shift rapidly, camera after camera, flickering, cutting to static. Then, on the central monitor, a message appeared. Connection terminated, local node compromised. The entire rack powered down. The hum died. Silence swallowed the room. Harris backed away, staring at the blank screens. No, they weren't supposed to. Before he could finish, red and blue lights flashed through the glass. Police cruisers screeched to a stop outside the HOA building. Karen exhaled in disbelief. You called them? I nodded. Daniel said to alert him if anything strange happened. My laptop's been pinging his trace this whole time. Within seconds, officers flooded the lobby. Harris didn't resist. He just stood there, staring at the dark monitors, muttering under his breath. You don't understand. They'll just build another. As they led him away, he turned his gaze to me. You didn't save anything. You just made yourself visible. The door slammed behind him. Hours later, after statements and paperwork, I finally stepped outside into the pale dawn light. The neighborhood was still, peaceful again, but it felt different now, like something unseen was still watching. Karen stood beside me, arms crossed tightly. Do you think it's really over? I glanced at the houses, the porch lights, the silent cameras, the faint hum of Wi-Fi routers everywhere. I don't know, I said. But if Harris was telling the truth, there's more out there than just Meadow Ridge. She nodded slowly. Then what do we do? I opened my laptop and checked the last file I'd copied before the shutdown. One folder had successfully transferred. It was labeled simply, P-Haste 2. The timestamp read next week. I closed the laptop, the reflection of the sunrise catching the edge of the screen. Whatever it is, I said quietly. It hasn't started yet. And somewhere, beyond our quiet little neighborhood, another camera clicked on. The morning after Harris's arrest, Meadow Ridge felt like a ghost town. The same people who once waved cheerfully while walking their dogs now drew their blinds shut when they saw me. The HOA building was sealed off with yellow tape, police cars patrolling at intervals. Yet, even with Harris in custody, there was this heavy stillness, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. Karen showed up at my doorstep early that morning, clutching 2 cups of coffee. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with red, but her voice was steady. You didn't sleep either, did you? I shook my head. Not a minute. She handed me a cup. The news says Harris is being held without bail. They're calling it one of the biggest privacy scandals in the state. I nodded, staring into the cup. Yeah, except it's not over. Not if what he said was true. Karen frowned. You mean the part about funding? That we're part of some bigger surveillance experiment? I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. The air felt heavier as I double-clicked the folder I'd copied from Harris's system, the one labeled PHASE. It contained a single document, just one. Project Continuity, activation date, November 12th. Underneath was a line of code and what looked like coordinates. I copied them into Google Maps. The result made my stomach drop. The coordinates pointed to a large industrial building about 10 miles away, Westbrook Data Facility. I knew the place. It was supposed to be a local cloud storage hub. Karen leaned over my shoulder. You think they're storing the neighborhood's footage there? Not just ours, I murmured. If Harris was part of a pilot program, that means there could be others, maybe dozens. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Then Karen asked softly, So, what do we do? We find out what Phase 2 is before it starts. By noon, we were standing outside the Westbrook facility. The place was enormous, high concrete walls, security cameras on every corner, and a gate guarded by 2 uniformed men. There was no signage, except a small plaque that read, Westbrook Technologies, Private Research Division. Karen looked uneasy. You sure this is a good idea? Not even a little, I said. But we're already too far in to turn back. We parked down the road and waited until a delivery van approached the gate. When the guard opened it, I started the engine, timed the movement perfectly, and slid in behind the van before the gate shut again. My heart pounded. We drove around to the back where several trucks were parked. I spotted an open loading bay door with workers moving boxes inside. I pulled the car into a blind spot, killed the engine, and nodded toward the entrance. That's our way in. Karen hesitated but followed me. Inside, the air was cool and humming with machinery. The entire space was filled with rows of black server racks, stretching out like endless corridors. The low, rhythmic buzz of data fans was almost hypnotic. We ducked behind a stack of crates as 2 technicians passed by, chatting casually. They said Phase 2 will go live next week, one said. The network's expanding. This time, they're including audio feeds and mobile sync. Seriously? That's a privacy nightmare. The other shrugged. Hey, I just maintain the hardware. I don't ask questions. When they disappeared around a corner, Karen whispered, Did you hear that? Audio feeds. Mobile sync. They're not just watching anymore, they're listening. I nodded grimly. They're upgrading the system to track conversations, maybe even link to phones. I pulled out my laptop, connecting to the nearest access point. The Wi-Fi network popped up instantly secured, but the naming convention looked familiar. M.R. Sec Zone 1. That confirmed it. This is the same network as ours, I said. They didn't dismantle the system after Harris's arrest, they centralized it here. Karen's voice was shaky. Then Harris was right. We're just a piece of something bigger. I started typing, trying to access the admin logs. But just as I began downloading the configuration files, a voice rang out behind us. Step away from the terminal. We froze. I turned slowly. 2 security officers stood there, both armed. Their expressions were blank, professional. One of them motioned toward the door. You're trespassing on private property. Let's go. Karen started to protest, but I raised a hand to stop her. Okay, I said calmly. We'll go. They escorted us outside and confiscated my laptop. One of them placed it into a black case before shutting the gate behind us. Karen turned to me, panic creeping into her tone. They took the only copy of the Phase 2 data. Not the only one, I said quietly, pulling out a small flash drive from my pocket. I mirrored it before we entered. Her eyes widened. You're insane, you know that? Probably, I said, smiling faintly, but now we have proof. That night, we met with Detective Daniels at the police precinct. He was skeptical at first, but after we showed him the files and explained what we'd seen, his expression changed completely. This goes beyond local law enforcement, he said. I'll forward this to the state cybercrime unit. But you two need to stay out of it now. Understand? Karen nodded. I didn't. Something told me it wasn't going to be that easy. As we left the station, the city streetlights flickered, just like the night Harris's system went offline. It was a small glitch, but after everything we'd seen, it didn't feel random. Karen noticed it too. Please tell me that's just bad wiring. I glanced around. Every streetlight down the road flickered again, one by one, like falling dominoes. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A single notification glowed on the screen. Phase 2 activated. The phone vibrated again. My home security app launched automatically, its camera feed showing the view from my driveway. Only this time, the image was inverted. Someone else was controlling my camera. Karen's face drained of color. It's starting, isn't it? I nodded slowly. They didn't shut down the network. They just changed who's in charge. A low hum filled the air. Somewhere in the distance, we heard the faint sound of sirens. The lights above flickered again, casting long, warped shadows across the pavement. And then, for a brief moment, I saw it, my own house appearing on every digital billboard lining the street, live video feeds flickering like ghostly reflections. Karen gripped my arm. They're broadcasting it. Not just broadcasting, I whispered. They're syncing everything. Phones, cars, homes, everything with a camera. I looked at the message again on my phone. The timestamp was identical to the activation schedule in the file. November 12th. That was today. The screen went black. Then a new message appeared. Just 2 words. Welcome online. Karen took a step back. What does that mean? It means, I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper, that Phase 2 isn't just about us being watched anymore. She swallowed hard. Then what is it? I looked toward the dark horizon where the city lights pulsed faintly. It's about turning the whole world into one big neighborhood. And as I said that, every phone around us began to buzz in unison. The hum grew louder. The lights dimmed. And for the first time, I realized we weren't watching the system anymore. The system was watching us. Where are you watching from tonight?